Hello everybody, welcome to your sample of our larger lesson on the PRRA as it relates to your ICCRC exam. So this is just a 15-minute sample. This lesson is available, of course, for our clients who purchase the full package. The full lesson is 1 hour long, and of course you'll work through a lot more material as you work through that lesson. So here's the outline of this lesson. So as you know, we love taking these complex areas of immigration and going through them step by step to make your life as easy as possible. So we're going to have 3 areas that we're going to cover in this lesson. The lesson will be about maybe an hour long. And of course, we're going to do some interactive activities in here, and in your simulations, you have questions on this. All right, so the first section we're going to take a look at is who can actually apply for a PRRA. This is a great area to test you on in an exam, where essentially you might have a huge story, and basically the question can be something like, can this person apply for a PRRA? So we're going to discuss all those details that you need to know in order to be able to make sure you get that question correct. What happens during a PRRA procedure, assuming a person can apply? Well, what happens after this person applies? And finally, who cannot apply for a PRRA? So some people are ineligible for a PRRA, and of course we'll go over each one of these areas step by step to make sure that you are, of course, happy that you've invested your time in this lesson. All right, so we saw what a PRRA is. Now we'll take a look at who can actually apply for a PRRA. So you see 2 symbols over here, and you can probably decipher a little bit about some of the requirements a person must have in order to apply for a PRRA. Now, a piece of advice for you is that with all of these programs, when we looked at refugees, if you went through the refugees lesson, we talked about this quite a bit, and every other program really, there are requirements. Now, we saw with federal skilled workers, for example, there are language requirements, etc., that a person must meet. And we have to remember that even when we are looking at a person with maybe a refugee type of situation where their life is in danger, they have to meet certain requirements. If they don't meet those requirements, regardless of how shocking the story can be sometimes, well, they just wouldn't meet the requirements of that program, and they would likely have to go back to their country, or maybe they would go on to a different place. So a PRRA, again, ensures that the Canadian government is not sending people to a country, or returning people, I guess, to their country where they would be in danger. Now, for a person, the person who is applying for the PRRA has to be in Canada. Let's say you have an example in your exam of a person who is in Mongolia, let's say, and the person wants to apply for a PRRA, or the person is in danger and wants to apply for refugee status at the Canadian Embassy. Well, it just doesn't work like that, right? People can't apply for refugee protection at a Canadian embassy. Okay, so the second one is that the person has to be, of course, in Canada, and also you have 2 options here. So one is subject to a removal order that is in force. Now remember, we have suspended removal orders. So for example, let's say a person has a removal order, and there is a huge hurricane that is devastating their country. Well, the Canadian government will not remove a person to that country, right? Because the person would, of course, be in danger. However, the government simply cannot stop the removal order and say, okay, well, you're allowed to stay here in Canada. So let's say a person, you have an example of this in one of the simulations as well. So let's say a person overstays a study permit. So the person's here studying and then or working, and let's say the work permit expires, the person still stays in Canada, gets caught, and the CBSA is going to remove this person. Or even if a person simply, that would be a removal order, of course, but that would be probably a deportation order, is the example I gave you there. Maybe a person receives a departure order where they have to leave the country within 30 days. Well, those are both examples of a removal order in force. Now, on the other side, you have a person who's subject of an Article 77 security certificate. This goes more with inadmissibility. We'll take a look at this in the next slide. But it's a person who essentially is inadmissible to Canada because it's a dangerous person. So you have these two requirements here. So first of all, a person has to be in Canada and either subject to a removal order that is in force or subject of an Article 77 security certificate. But this isn't for everybody, right? There's always exceptions in immigration. There's always exceptions in the exam. I think the exam really focuses, of course, on exceptions. And that's what we will talk about here. So I've got a thing that just popped up here, said extradited. So you probably know where I'm going with this. But if a person is being extradited from Canada to a different country, well, the person, even if the person is in danger in that country, the person cannot apply for a PRRA simply because the person, if the person committed a crime or something like that in the other country, well, the person has to go back to that country. Okay, so what about people who were ineligible to file a claim for refugee protection? So the claim was ineligible to be referred to the RPD. So you might be wondering what this means. We did a big lesson on this. It's in the Refugees Procedures lesson. And it's we talked about it quite a bit. I won't really go over it too much in this video because this is an area that we should know already. But I think you get the idea that a lot of these topics interlink with each other. So if you've mastered refugees, well, this is going to help you, of course, with a lot of other topics as well, right? But we have to know all the puzzle pieces. We have to have all the puzzle pieces covered. And of course, PRRA forms one of those puzzle pieces. So if a person was ineligible to be referred to the RPD, it could be someone who was a criminal or something like that. It could be a 1E, a 1F exclusion. Anyways, a person under that situation cannot file for a PRRA either. Okay, and when people receive their removal order or the decision that they are ineligible for protection, well, they would be notified that they're entitled to apply for a PRRA. This gives the instructions to them and everything like that, and then they have a certain timeline that we'll see in the next couple slides here to apply for this. Okay, so there is an exception to this as well. Subsequent PRRA. So when a PRRA is rejected, they do not give a person all the information again, the application package, etc., to apply for another PRRA, and of course a port of entry PRRA. All right, so how does the previous slide relate to IRPA and the regulations? And of course, how does IRPA and the regulations relate to the PRRA? We talked about this a little bit already, and what I want to do with this slide is, again, just show you that I think what we do with the lessons here is what we really try to do is take all of the information given to you that you learned in your program, give you a little review, and help you to see this in the context of scenarios that might come up in the exam. So when we take a look at the previous slide and we compare it to what IRPA says, it's pretty identical. The only thing is that IRPA sometimes can be a little bit wordy, I guess we could say. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to read through all those sections of IRPA as well. Sometimes you just kind of get lost in all the words in there. So I've got two sections here that are highlighted because sometimes, as you know, in IRPA you have to sort of jump back and forth because they'll refer to previous to articles that were talked about in other sections of IRPA or the regulations. And I just wanted to go over this one just to again, reiterate those main requirements of a person who is applying for PRRA. Okay, so a person in Canada, so we saw this already. We see the exceptions over here that they're talking about as well, other than a person referred to in subsection 115. And then they're saying they can apply for a PRRA if they're subject of a removal order or an Article 77. So what is referred to under subsection 115? Well, we've got that over here. So it's a pretty long sentence. I highlighted it because I think this is a sentence that we should split into two. So a protected person or a person who's recognized as a convention refugee by another country to which the person may be returned. So if Canada wants to deport a person or send a person back to another country, again, Article 115 says, of course, that a person cannot be sent to a country where they would be put into situations that would make them refugees anyways. So you can see they word this as the nexus, like we saw in the refugees lesson. So shall not be removed from Canada to a country where they would be at risk of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership, a particular social group, political opinion. So we've seen this already, of course, under the nexus, or at risk of torture or cruel and unusual treatment or punishment. So that covers, of course, convention refugees and persons in need of protection. Now, there are exceptions, of course. What if a person's a criminal? Well, that person would not be able to stay in Canada in most cases. What if the person came to Canada, made a claim, and then it was found out that he or she was a human rights violator? So maybe the person was a war criminal. Well, that person wouldn't be able to stay in Canada, regardless of if their country is dangerous. Okay, and then I just wanted to touch a little bit upon Article 77. So remember that this is the certificate that states a person's inadmissible to Canada. So, and it covers kind of the more serious inadmissibility areas within the IRPA. So security, human international rights violations, serious criminality, organized criminality. So what are the officers looking for in a PRRA application? Well, as we talked about before, really it is a safeguard to make sure that the government is not sending people into a situation where they would then be refugees or a person in need of protection. So the biggest piece of advice to give you is, again, to make sure that you've gone through the refugee lessons. It's about 10 hours of lessons. I know it's really, really, really thorough. And with this, you'll have a better understanding of PRRA, of course, because essentially they're looking for the same things. Okay, so we have under A, it's basically the difference between 96 and a 97. So we have danger of torture, risk of to life, of cruel and unusual treatment or punishment, etc., etc. And we've gone through all of this, of course. So for B, we have the nexus, which is, of course, used for convention refugees. And again, if you have a good understanding of those lessons of what we discussed, well, you understand exactly what they're looking for in the PRRA. So you might ask yourself why there would be the system if, of course, a person has already gone through a refugee hearing and probably an appeal and all that type of stuff. Well, again, it's just to make sure that it's sort of like a double check or a triple check, just to make sure that the government will not send a person into a situation which would violate that person's human rights, of course, and of course Canada's obligations to the Geneva Convention. All right, everyone, so if you enjoyed this quick little snippet of our lesson, well, be sure to purchase the full package. With that, you get all of the lessons, you get all of the material as well, and of course, you'll be as happy as this guy in the picture. All right, everyone, have a good day, keep up the good work, and see you at the seminar.